Hello fans of the RPG Fanatic Show, and welcome to the second newsletter about everything that's been going on with the RPG Fanatic website. Now, as many of you guys know, this website is basically coming out of the research that I've been conducting into the computer RPG genre. For example, I made this video, which I'll have an annotation here to it, where I talked about the family tree of computer RPGs, like what all the different games birthed other games by either being made by the same people and they reincorporated some of the ideas from those games, or they inspired other people who played those games to make their own game. An example would be Dungeons & Dragons inspiring D&D for the Play-Doh. And then, of course, things like Zork inspiring Rogue, and then Rogue inspired NetHack. So this website will be able to let us create an accurate family tree of all the different games, which I think is going to be very useful for people who are researching video game history. The other thing is that if you go to our Games Wiki menu, you'll be able to select by the different genres: comedy, fantasy, historical, horror, so forth. And you'll also be able to look by platform, and you'll be able to search by publisher. Another thing that we'll have here is that you can search by the narrative model. If you go to a games article, we have here narrative genre, and then right below that, narrative model. And the different narrative models we support is linear, dynamic nonlinear, and static nonlinear. Now, some people wonder, what does this mean? Well, on every game article page, there's a link here to our style guide. And our style guide explains what this stuff is. We've got our combat systems, but let's go down to the narratives here. Okay. So narrative model, linear. The narrative travels in a straight line with no alternate routes. This is the narrative model used by the majority of fiction, such as novels, films, television shows, and video games. So people really know what linear is. You don't really see it a lot in other types of fiction. Other types, anyway. It's almost everything is linear. There's very few books that aren't that are nonlinear, and what it is, it's usually by having flashbacks and stuff like that. Or the other alternative would be a game book, like Choose Your Own Adventure. That could be nonlinear. But what type of nonlinear is it really? There's multiple types of nonlinearity, and a lot of people don't understand this, so I've defined it. Dynamic nonlinear is the rarest type of nonlinear narrative model. The player makes choices during gameplay that shape the game's narrative in a meaningful and critical ways, so as to substantially change the direction of the game's narrative. There are either no or very few milestone events the player must clear in order for the narrative to advance. The game offers a large number of narrative routes the player can choose to bypass, and that will not prevent the narrative from moving forward. An example is Romancing Saga and Minstrel Song, and also Fallout. So this is really complicated for people to understand. So I have this diagram here that basically visualizes what a narrative path in a dynamic nonlinear narrative game would look like. You have a starting point, and then you have all these choices, and every time you make a choice, you have all these other choices that you can go around. Now, the other one most people are familiar with a static nonlinear game, which is primarily just dialogue trees that make slight changes in the narrative, but not substantial changes. The ending is usually identical at the end, but there might be slight variations to the ending. The important thing is that this is the most common type of nonlinear model. The choices made by the player do not alter the narrative in significant ways, and the narrative generally travels in a single direction with few deviations. This kind of nonlinear narrative is built around milestone events, which they absolutely have to be passed through, regardless of what route the player takes. The game's narrative cannot move forward if these milestones are not cleared. An example is Persona 4. Another example is Dragon Age Origins. I have also created an image to illustrate what the narrative paths, a static nonlinear narrative look like, which is basically like this. Start, you have a couple choices, but regardless of what choice you make, you've still got to go to this milestone event. And then again, a couple choices, but you still got to go to the milestone event. So, now for combat. That's another important thing that we should discuss a bit, because this can be kind of complicated. With combat genres, it's not just turn-based action RPG. It's more complicated than that. Phase turn-based. Okay, this is a type of turn-based. This is basically what Dragon Quest and Wizardry had. At the start of combat, the game waits for the player to decide the actions their character or characters will take when combat begins. These systems have combat time divided into blocks called rounds. The combat system descends directly from the tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons, though the games use a more abstract concept of range than Dungeons & Dragons did. For example, Final Fantasy has a concept of a front row and a back row, and you don't really move around around the battlefield. In a phased turn-based system, the player characters will always act in combat before the opposing NPCs can act. So it's basically, I take a turn, you take a turn. It's like how most card games play. People don't have the ability to respond to what the other person is doing during the round. That's where sequential turn-based comes in. A turn-based system where each character, including the NPCs in the battle, has a speed rating that determines the precise order they will act during a combat round. The system is otherwise identical to phased turn-based combat. While the way turns are determined is more similar to D&D, the abstract nature of range remains. This is what the majority of turn-based RPGs are considered to be. A lot of them are sequential turn-based games. The next type of turn-based is active turn-based. Games using a system derived from Final Fantasy IV's active time battle system. There's a lot of games that have this. Unlike sequential and phased, there is no pause between rounds. After taking an action, characters gradually accumulate points as time passes to fill a bar, and when that bar is full, they can make an action. Sometimes there'll be a bar and sometimes there won't be a bar. It depends on the game. But usually there's some sort of graphical bar to represent when the character can next act to help the player determine the turn order. However, like sequential turn-based, characters have a speed rating that determines how quickly their bar fills up. I can't really think of any active turn-based games that don't have some type of speed rating that helps determine how quickly the bars increase. There's no way to do haste and slow effects if you don't do something like that. Real-time based. Games where characters do not take turns. This is where we basically get into our action RPG stuff, the real-time based combat systems. Instead, action happens in real time. Characters may or may not have delays on what actions they may take, but are capable of moving at any time and almost always have some meaningful action they can do during combat. So there could be like a limit, like example being Seiken Densetsu 3, where you can only use a melee attack like 3 times and you have to wait for a very short duration before it recharges again so you can attack. But the whole time your character can run around the battlefield and use items and stuff. So it's still a real-time based game. Pausable real-time based. This is where things get a little bit more trickier. Real-time combat games where players must pause the gameplay to issue orders to characters. Once the game is unpaused, the orders are carried out by the characters. Some examples are Secret of Mana, Fallout 3, and Parasite Eve. I would also consider Dragon Age 2 to basically be a real-time, pausable real-time based system, because in order for you to control the other characters, to issue them orders, you have to pause the game, basically. Everything stops while you're issuing commands. So that's a pausable real-time based game. It even uses a ring menu type of thing, like in Secret of Mana. Wargaming turn-based. This is basically the strategy RPGs people come to know them as. But we're calling them wargaming turn-based here because their gameplay is basically perfectly modeling tabletop wargaming games like Chainmail or what's another good example? Warhammer would be a good example. Games using a system descending from tabletop wargames. These games tend to be called strategy RPGs. The player controls a squad of characters who fight across a battlefield using a turn-based combat system. They tend to have a more definite concept of range, whereas a sequential turn-based game like Final Fantasy only uses an abstract concept of range, like the rows. And that's really what's different here. There's actually battlefields, and you can manipulate your characters around a battlefield. And occasionally, some of these games might even have it so that if you have a squad that's fighting near a squad of archers, the squad of archers will attack the enemies that your close quarters combat foot soldiers are fighting. So the combat system incorporates range, and it's really just like a tabletop wargaming game. Wargaming real-time based is the next wargaming type system. This is a game using a system descending from tabletop war games, but the player controls a squad of characters who fight across a battlefield using real-time based combat system. There's a couple games that are like this. It's basically, your typical strategy game with RPG mechanics, so it's all real-time based. Roguelike based, a game that uses a combat system derived from Rogue. If you don't know what a roguelike is, I implore you to at least check out my Azure Dreams review, because it will explain to you exactly what a roguelike is. An example of this type of game would be the Mystery Dungeon series of games, or Rogue. Okay, now we're going to get into something a little more tricky. This is a new genre that's been proposed by Ian Lutz, who posts here as HCUBE Entertainment. He proposed that we also define the card-centric game combat systems. And I agree, because if you read this text down below, he explains that when you use card-playing mechanics in a combat system, it really does substantially change how the game plays. So we have these separate. And basically, these definitions are here. You can read them. It's basically the same type of combat systems that exist, the same combat systems that exist up here, but using card-centric resource mechanics and the idea of shifting a deck. And there's a lot more randomness involved in the combat, is basically what ends up happening. So, next thing I would like to talk about is the great success that we've had. We have two main big successes this week. The first, as you can see down here, is that we've got our thumbnail generation going. Jason worked real hard on this and got this working for all the feeds. So if you go to the reviews section, you see thumbnails for all the games. And what's going to be really cool is that the way this is working is if you make a forum post, we're working on forums next. When you make a forum post, you can attach a game to that forum post. And it will appear with, you can look at the game info, and it will also show the icon for that game. So that's pretty neat. Additionally, the thumbnail generator is also working on the wiki summary here. It's also showing it. So regardless of what page you're on, you're looking at the Let's Plays, you're looking at reviews, it's still going to show you an image here so you can clearly see what game you're looking at. Because some of these, we might have it eventually so that there's multiple types of feeds on a single page. So we want to make sure people don't get confused by what they're looking at. So that's one big plus. The next one is that we've got lots and lots of games in our database. I mean, look at this. We've got tons of games. Tons and tons and tons of games. I mean, really, we're in the L's right now. There's so many more games here. We've got a really good start. And I want to show you guys some of the people who have been working on this. Oh, I forgot to do the Steam one. Update, and it's approved. That's another thing. If you're curious when you submit stuff, I need to approve it. And the reason this is because we don't want people to enter games that already have been submitted. There's some people that have done that already, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to have the same article entered in the game, in the database. So there's really no point for that. And sometimes people make a mistake. Maybe they misspelled it when they were searching here to see if the game exists in the database. But it's fine because I can, just delete it, and it's not a problem. Or they'll submit it and they won't use like the correct name. The name might be misspelled, or it's missing something important that should be part of it. So what I'll do is I'll fix it, and then I'll put that they initial submission by that individual, so they still get credited in it. They still get their experience for submitting, but it now says that I submitted it because I'm the one who made the change to the article. Anyway, some of the people that have been working really hard to add stuff is Metal Dragon X. He's added a bunch of articles. Of course, Ian, HCUBE Entertainment. Tons of articles. Who else we've got? We've got... Scrolling down here. Oh, too far. We've got lots of me. Xenic Reverie added a huge number of articles. You've done a lot of stuff. 8-Bit Eric added The Legend of Zelda. I'm leaving that in there simply because I know people are going to constantly be submitting this game. So I've got it in here, and I've justified it as that The Legend of Zelda has had enough influence in lots of computer RPGs to at least acknowledge inclusion. So, but it's not an RPG, guys. It really isn't. Anyway, Zybeck TV has added some games. Woodstick, one of the featured contributors here, added a couple games. We've got Anime Adams added a few games. Let's Play Noob added a bunch of games. Bardic Dragoon added a ton of games, actually. Yep, lots of them. He's also got Terry309, who's added a whole bunch of them. We've got Dragon Warrior 7 Freak added a whole bunch of games. And we've got 80 Maxwell 08, who's added a bunch of games. We've got Kid Cabooses, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's added a bunch of games. His games have been mostly the Satellaview, the Nintendo Satellaview system, like the Zelda BS and so forth. And again, I'm allowing them to be in there simply because I believe that they had some influence on other computer RPGs with online capabilities. So, Potato Sack has added a bunch of games, most of them being front mission titles. Super Conj added a few games. Let's see. Who else have we got? I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. I want to make sure. Yep, it's pretty much just been these individuals here who have added everything. Jason added World of Warcraft. I don't think I've missed anybody. I think I've talked about everybody who's submitted. So, yeah. Thank you so much, guys, for helping flesh out this database. We have tons of games. And I wish I could just look at the ID and tell you this is the number of articles that we have, because there's a couple entries that are missing. But just as a rough estimate, I would say we have somewhere around, I would say that 380, between 390 is probably an accurate estimate of how many titles are in here. So we're making lots of progress. I still think that there's thousands of games out there to archive, but we're making progress. The other thing is that we're working on Operation Manafall. I think I should probably do that in a separate newsletter, but I will touch upon it anyway. Operation Manafall is really coming along pretty well, I think. We're really starting to get a lot of people coming into the project and posting. I've got 2 polls going asking people what platforms they want to see the game re-released on, and I'm asking what new features they want to see in a re-release. For example, I personally would like to see multiplayer support for 3 players, but some people are also voting to have it have online capabilities, and I think that would be pretty cool too. So I hope you guys will definitely check out Operation Manafall. I will put a link in the description here to Operation Manafall directly, or you can just check out the video I put together about the Second Densetsu 3 retrospect and Operation Manifold. So I'm going to close this video up. This is the second newsletter. Thank you guys so much for watching this and sticking with us. I really believe that we can make this website work, and I hope that the next thing I talk to you guys about is going to be our forum, because it's going to be pretty cool. Thanks, guys, and keep gaming.